big welcome to everybody today and thank you for joining us. Today, this webinar is looking at limiting risk, so safe steps to food donation. It's brilliant to have you here as we look at the important role of food safety and surplus food redistribution. World Food Safety Day was actually celebrated there on the 7th of June, and at FoodCloud, food safety is at the heart of absolutely everything that we do. In my role in FoodCloud, I speak to a lot of food partners and food businesses. And over the years, a very common concern that always comes up is how do you make sure that the food that we donate is safe? What about liability? And what happens if something goes wrong? These are all very valid concerns. And over the course of this webinar, we really hope to address those concerns head on. And we'll talk about how food safety is assured at every stage of the surplus redistribution process. We're going to share real life examples of how this works in practice and also address common misconceptions around food safety and surplus food redistribution. My name is Caroline McSorley and I am the head of Irish Partnerships with FoodCloud. I'm delighted to welcome you all today. And for those of you who are not familiar with FoodCloud and the work that we do, FoodCloud is a not-for-profit social enterprise that simply connects businesses with surplus food to charities and community groups nationally to make sure that we get perfectly good food to those who need it. And we do that through two avenues. We have a virtual redistribution platform called Foodiverse that simply connects food businesses like retail stores with smaller volumes of food directly with charities in their local area. And we have hubs in Dublin, in Cork and Galway that rescue and redistribute surplus food that occurs further up the supply chain at processing, manufacturing and distribution level. We take that into our hubs, break it down and redistribute it to charities across the country. For today's webinar, I am delighted to be joined by a panel of experts in the field of food safety and surplus food redistribution. So today we have Michelle Savage, who is a food safety consultant, and Michelle has vast experience in food safety, specialising in auditing, system development and training, and has worked very closely with FoodCloud in terms of food safety and surplus food redistribution. We have Karen Capcarrere, who is the head of food service and food safety at FoodCloud. Karen joined the FoodCloud team in 2016 and has developed FoodCloud's food safety management systems. She works very closely with both our food partners and with our charity network, as well as the FoodCloud team, to ensure that food safety guidelines are followed and that the necessary protocols are in place. Karen also oversees the FoodCloud Kitchen as well, our newest innovation, to rescue and reuse even more surplus food beyond redistribution to charities. And finally, we have Suzanne O'Brien, who is the FSQA manager with HelloFresh. So Suzanne joined the HelloFresh team back in October 2022, having previously held roles in Donnybrook Fair and with Musgrave Group. And HelloFresh have been working very closely with FoodCloud since 2023, and to date have redistributed the equivalent of over 77,000 meals to charities and community groups across Ireland. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, who's going to set the scene for us today by providing an overview of, what is food donation, what food safety guidelines and legislative frameworks are in place, and she'll also give us a few top tips in terms of if you're looking to introduce surplus food redistribution into your organisation, what are the key elements to consider? So Michelle, I am going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carla, for that. Hello, everybody, and thanks to the FoodCloud team for the invitation. It's great today to be able to talk to everybody about the steps that are required to food donation and the food safety controls that need to be put in place. So we'll start with the first slide. That's great. So I suppose just to begin the presentation, it's to look at what is food donation. So food donation is the supply of surplus food, and whether that's food that comes from any part of the food chain, whether that's retail, manufacturing, hospitality, and how that can be redistributed to various charities or organisations. Now, the point to note is that food donation is no difference in terms of risk to the customer. It's the exact same as if you were going to sell it to your end consumer. So for that reason, the foods that are to be donated need to be in good condition, need to be handled and distributed safely. Examples of foods that can be donated would include foods that have been pre-packed. There might be situations where food might be over-ordered, or there might be sales might not be there, so they're perfectly acceptable to be donated. And also foods that have not been pre-packed, so these might be loose products, and that they then also can be donated. So as I said, examples of foods that can be donated include surplus stock, maybe it's down to overproduction or cancelled orders, or maybe something that's been pre-packed but it's been put into the wrong packaging or is being labelled incorrectly. So to give an overview of what the requirements are for food safety, I suppose that the starting point here is about the food hygiene regulations. So food donations falls under the same regulation as any other type of food. So in most cases, that would be Regulation 852. And that means that you have to consider all of the steps involved in the production or the process of your product. So if we come out from that, the first thing that we need to consider is that if that's a change in the process, you may have to notify your whether it's your environmental health or your DAFM auditor that comes to the site, and let them know that there might be a change, and it's just more of a courtesy to say that may be happening. The other thing that you need to consider is about the condition of the product that's going to be donated. And just like anything else, it has to be of acceptable condition. So things that you might need to consider would be, how is it going to be distributed? Do you need to repackage it so that it can be transported correctly? What type of dates are you going to permit to be donated? Obviously, anything that's past its use-by date is not permitted, that's illegal. But anything with the best before date, as long as it's in good condition, can be donated. So as a company, you might need to decide what those limits are going to be. Are you going to sell it fresh? Are you going to sell it frozen? If you're going to sell it frozen, then do you need to change the label? So that takes us on to the next point, which is the labeling information. If it is pre-packed, it's going to have the exact same label requirements as if you were selling it onto your end consumer. If you're going to sell it loose, then there will be some more consideration there. You'll have to provide information to the likes of Food Cloud, as in what is the product, what are the allergens contained, if there's any specific storage instructions, if it's been previously frozen and then thawed, kind of all of those requirements that you would already consider if you were developing any of your products. Traceability is also applicable. If you are a retailer, or if you are a caterer, your traceability is one step back, but this would apply now to a one step forward traceability. So you would have to have some means of knowing who did the product go to and what product was donated. Also, if you're donating product which is of animal origin, there would need some batch code details there as well. And then the last point to consider is your food safety management plan or your HACCP plan. If this is a change to the process, you may have to risk assess it. You may have to add that process step into a HACCP plan or onto your process flow diagram. You may have to develop some procedures in and around that. But again, there'll be no difference to any other process that you might introduce to your own food safety plan. Okay, next slide. So what I've done here is I've given some links to really good, useful information. The FSCI, as you know, provide excellent information to the food industry, and they have a really, really useful document there on food businesses and food donations. So again, I would definitely ask you to have a look at that. There are some links there. There's some links to the UK, also from the EC, and of the said catering pack also has some information on it there as well. So there's some excellent some further information. And then just to finish off, I suppose the key points or the key elements to a successful food donation is, number one, decide what foods can and cannot be donated. What foods are you happy as a company to donate, and make sure that everybody within the business is aware of that. You may have to develop and train out some internal procedures, such as what checks do you need to complete to look out for product integrity? What are your minimum use by dates that you're going to accept to donate? And what's your policy around best before dates? Are you going to freeze the product in-house? If you are, what controls do you need to put in place for that? And then, as I said, labeling and traceability, what information do you need to provide? You may have to update your food safety management system to reflect these processes and procedures, and you will have to inform your inspecting officer if there is a change to that process. And lastly, like any new process that you introduce, you need to make sure that it's monitored and assessed. You make sure that you're happy with the procedures that you have. If they're not, you might need to make some changes. You might need to do some retraining, but making sure that everybody within the business is aware of those new procedures and making sure that they work. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Some really interesting takeaways and some really interesting tips there. I think what I've pulled out of there, just particularly from that last slide, and I think it's important to highlight that, you know, it's the minimization of risk. And actually a lot of food businesses, you know, with every food business, you can control your risk to what you're comfortable with. So, and this is something that we would see very commonly with a lot of food businesses who maybe are a little bit unsure when they first start out. So they might start out with some low risk items to redistribute first. And as, you know, the process embeds and things go, you can always change that and expand that out. So I think that's an important piece to highlight. As well as that, you've shared some really brilliant links there, and we'll share those links with everybody after the webinar, because there's some really, really useful information in there. Michelle, one of the things that really struck me, and you said it at the beginning, is that donated food has to be in the same condition as if it's sold. And I suppose that just kind of leads me to the question, you know, it is important that in surplus redistribution, even though you're not the product isn't being paid for, it's still going to an end consumer. It's still going to somebody who is being eaten, or that it's going to be eaten. So I suppose just a question to have before we move on is, you know, is there any difference between donating food and selling food to a customer directly or through a third party?
No, absolutely not. As you rightly said, Carla, the product's going to be consumed, so it has to be of it's fit for consumption. So whether that's the packaging that you're going to use, making sure that it's in good condition, good order, that it's not damaged, that the information is legible on the label, that obviously the product is fresh, all of those factors that you would consider when it comes to selling your own product, they absolutely apply when it comes to food donation.
Brilliant. And you've mentioned there some top tips. What, in your experience, what are the main barriers that food companies come across when they're implementing food donation into their existing procedures?
What we come across is where people haven't really thought it all the way through to the end process. So they sign up to it, they say, yes, we're going to do this, but then they actually don't consider what foods they are going to donate and foods that they're not going to donate. And that can lead to a little bit of confusion. So it's important as a team that you agree, okay, this product can be donated. We can transport this product successfully. We know that the packaging is good. We know that it's something that obviously people will want as well, but you and then there might be other products that might not stand up to transport, might not be, you know, so there might be other things to consider there. And the last thing then would be to making sure that that information is fed through to the whole business, that everybody in the business is aware of what is happening, especially when it comes to traceability, labeling, short dates, all of that type of information.
Brilliant. And you've mentioned there just about the foods that can be donated or what can be donated. Is there anything that can't be donated?
Yeah, you can't donate anything that's out of date. I mean, that's illegal. So you have to, that's why I'm saying you need to decide as a company, what is the minimum shelf life that you're going to donate, and making sure that that's, you know, followed all the way through the process. Obviously, if it's damaged, if the packaging is damaged and there's a possibility that the product could become contaminated or temperature abuse, any of the food safety risks that you would have for any of your product that you would sell onto the final consumer, they would be the main things.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michelle. Karen, that leads us nicely to yourself to talk about Food Cloud. So, Karen and I have been working in Food Cloud for the past almost 10 years now, and we've really seen, I suppose, the growth in that space of time, which has been really wonderful to see. And as I mentioned, Karen's team is responsible for our food safety management system. Karen is the one that has developed that, and really, Karen, as we said, food safety is absolutely paramount to the work the Food Cloud does. It underpins everything that we do, and just as Michelle has said there, the food that is being redistributed is going for human consumption. It's going to an end consumer, and we need to make sure that that food is in a perfectly edible, safe condition when it reaches that person. So could you give us a little bit of an overview around, I suppose, food safety, a Food Cloud or food safety management system, and how we manage that at scale?
Thanks, Carla, and thanks, Michelle. That was a great introduction to food safety. I don't have to go over any of those points, so that's brilliant. I think just from Food Cloud's point of view, I was thinking about what to discuss here, and rather than go through everything we have, because we have to have the same as every other food business, I suppose the concerning areas for people who would like to donate food can be, traceability, liability, labeling. So I wanted to just hit on how we control food as it comes in the door. In Food Cloud, you know that there's two sides to food donation. With Food Cloud, we have a virtual solution, and we also have a physical solution. So if I speak about the physical solution, is our warehouses. And in the warehouses, we have a full food safety management system. We have a full warehouse management system that gives us effective traceability and so full product recall. And part of that food safety management system actually would be a lot of Michelle's input into developing a really effective audit schedule, audit program, making sure that we're managing risk the whole time. One good thing that we have in food, we have lots of good things in Food Cloud, but one of the good things we have in Food Cloud is we do have the ability to add additional labeling or relabel where necessary. So that in the area of food donation is excellent, because if you have a product that maybe was labeled in another language for another market, we can add the English language to that. Or if you have any specific requirements, or indeed sometimes you might have no label on a specific product, and once we receive the correct information, we can add labels to those products. So I think that really facilitates food donation very well. And of course, we use a lot of food through our kitchen project, which I have to mention because it's new. And this is opening up a whole other area of manufacturing to us, where we can approach different suppliers for food that may not be suitable for charity partners, but we would definitely be able to use it in our community meals program through our kitchen. So I think we're all the time looking at innovative solutions to the types of food that we can get offered from food business. Each year we work on different ways of improving what we're able to offer. So, we work very closely with the Food Safety Authority, we work very closely with the HSE, and we rely on their advice quite a lot. And for example, the Food Safety Authority have produced guidelines for food donation, which are fantastic, and they do have guidelines in there for food donors. There will be a link to that website attached to this, so it will be really good to have a look at that if you're considering food donation. And we have all of the other aspects. Another thing that people may get concerned about is our charity partners. So all of our charity partners have to register with Food Cloud. They go through a full food safety check with our team, and we make sure that they are trained, that they have capacity, and that we understand what's happening to the food once they receive the food. So I suppose we're making sure that all the way to the end, we're managing that risk. We also make sure that any food, like inevitably there is going to be food products that we don't get back out to charity for any unfortunate reason. We ask for a minimum of 3 days shelf life on food that's being donated, and that allows us enough time to get it through our management system and back out to charity. But if for some reason there is food that we cannot get back out, we do send that on to anaerobic digestion. So we do feel that we have a circular movement of food through Food Cloud. And I suppose the biggest thing for me is more to answer any questions that you have. But I think it's safe to say that in in the food safety world or in the quality management world, we are responsible every bit the same as any other food business. So we have to control every bit the same as every other food business. We'd love it to be, you know, really different, but as Carla said, food safety has to underpin everything that we do. And a lot of our end users are vulnerable. And so I think we have an added responsibility and then an added step in our food safety management system to make sure that that's respected, if that makes sense. That's everything from me, Carla.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. No, that's what I was just about to say. And just a note that I made when you were talking about, you know, really just highlighting, you know, Food Cloud, we are, while we are a charity, we are a registered food business, and we do have to comply with our own legislative requirements, which is the same as really any other food business. And that is paramount to us. And as you've said, Karen, because we do have to bear in mind that the end users are particularly vulnerable. So we need to make sure that the food that they're receiving is perfectly fine and fit for human consumption. And Michelle, going back to what you were saying, that it's in the same condition as a consumer would receive it, not even just from a food safety point of view, but from a dignity point of view as well. You know, people who are maybe struggling to make ends meet and to that are in food poverty. You know, it's we do need to make sure that that their dignity is upheld. I think as well, Karen, you've mentioned there about the warehouse management system. We can actually track exactly where our food has gone to. Isn't that correct? We have forward traceability.
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, all food businesses are required to do that, but we added a lot of additional information into our warehouse management system just to make sure that there was zero risk if there was a product recall or if we received any queries. But we do have a full traceability system in place, yeah.
Brilliant. And I suppose a common question that I would come across, particularly from a food business perspective, and I suppose going back to where the highest risk is the cold chain, and about you know, how do we maintain the cold chain for perishable items? So could you give us a bit of an overview, Karen? I know you talked a lot there about, you know, our food safety management system, but can you talk a little bit about how we manage the cold chain of food coming through our warehouse?
Yeah, so I suppose we have our fleet, you know, we have 11 vehicles capable of delivering frozen and chilled products. So from product coming into us, it either comes through one of our vehicles or it comes from the manufacturer directly. So we have no problem there. With cold chain, we have monitored fridges and freezers that are set up to electronic monitoring. So we're always aware of temperature control in the warehouse itself. And of course, we have training in place so that the team know exactly what to do, and exactly the same as every other food business that does distribution. We are very much aware of the length of time, you know, for loading, for unloading, and so on. And then I think we went an extra step and put data loggers in our fleet because we wanted to make sure that the product was being treated respectfully. So I think always in Food Cloud we're trying to do an extra piece just to satisfy the questions that donors might have. And I think if they can see the amount of work we put into product safety, it might answer a lot of questions for them when deciding whether we should or shouldn't donate, or whether it's a risk or isn't a risk, you know.
Yeah. And I suppose my last question is probably in two parts. So, and it feeds into that, is how does Food Cloud ensure that partners comply with their food safety protocols? And I suppose how do we reassure partners that participating in redistribution won't compromise their product or compromise their brand?
Well, again, it's the same as every other food business. So one step forward is what we control. But I suppose when a charity registers with us, on top of checking their premises, we check their own management system. We check how they plan to use the food. But we'll also look at then the majority of our charities get food delivery. We don't allow charities to collect chilled food unless it's a very minimal amount. Other than that, they have their own chill van, or they and we don't allow the movement of frozen food unless it's in one of our vans. So we do have controls in place for our charity partners. We also insist that they all have food safety training, in particular if they're cooking, and we also insist that they're registered with Environmental Health. So I think we're not regulators in that space, but we do ensure that they don't come on board with us unless they meet the criteria for safe. We want the food distributed safely down the line. You know, we don't want to create a part of our commitment as a food bank or as part of the European food banking network is that we don't create risk for our beneficiaries. So we don't want to kick a can down the road and say, you know, hey, it's up to you now to manage that. We offer support, we offer training, we're available to them 24/7. When they make a collection, they know that they can call us and ask us if they're in any doubt whatsoever. And I think we have guidance coming out of our ears that we send to all of our registered charities to make sure they're fully aware of their responsibilities.
Lovely. Thank you, Karen. And that very nicely leads us into Suzanne. Suzanne, thanks for joining today. So as you mentioned, Suzanne is from HelloFresh, and HelloFresh Food Cloud have been working together for the past 2 years. So Suzanne, I'm going to pass over to you now really to provide a real life example about how this works in practice. You know, Michelle has covered the context behind you know, the guidance and the framework that's in place in Ireland. Karen, we've talked about our own food safety processes. So how does that accumulate then in terms of actually what that looks like on the ground? So Suzanne, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carla. Yeah, so just a very brief introduction of HelloFresh and what we are. We're a meal kit delivery company. We're currently in 18 countries. Was launched in Ireland in October 2022, and our mission is to change the way people eat forever. A huge value of HelloFresh is reducing food waste, so it ties in so nicely with the values from Food Cloud. If we can just move on to the next slide. Yeah, so we it's a subscription, it's a weekly subscription basis. You have 40 meals to choose from on a weekly basis. You can choose up to 6 meals a week for 2 or 4 people. There's sides, and there's a range of meals for all our customers. Sorry, the next slide there. So how it works is customer orders, we put in the order for the ingredients, we receive the ingredients, then the ambient ingredients are put into a brown kitted bag, and then they're assembled into a box with a cool pouch with all your cold chilled ingredients, and then it's shipped to the customer. So as I said, one of the huge values is HelloFresh is about reducing food waste, which is why we send out all of your ingredients in pre-portioned sizes. So everything in your box should be used. But when we launched, we realized very quickly that, as with every other food business, we do have food waste, and we needed to put a solution in very quickly to try and reduce that. And we found Food Cloud very quickly, and we started working with them to try to reduce the amount of food waste that we have. I think the major thing that we had to agree, and Michelle has already touched on this, is we worked with Food Cloud very, very early about what we could and what we couldn't donate. And it is very clear, it's very clear out in our distribution centre. This donation process is led by, we have a team of QCs out there, and there's a QC supervisor who owns this process, and it is very clear what we're allowed to donate and not donate. So for example, with our protein products, as Karen said, nothing less than 3 days can be donated. All of our fruit and veg, which is quality checked prior to being donated, all of the whole fruit and veg we can donate. One thing, unfortunately, we can't do is, for example, if a box gets returned by a customer, because we've kind of lost the chain of that, we don't feel that that is safe to donate. I suppose the major thing that we consider is Food Cloud is another customer of ours. And that's how we look at it. So if it wouldn't be safe or of quality to send to our customers, we don't send it to Food Cloud either. So in setting up the system, it was incredibly easy. Karen came out, visited our site. We went through exactly what we do, what our process looks like. Between ourselves and Food Cloud, we decided what we could and couldn't donate. From the steps from our side, we added it to our HACCP plan. We've added Food Cloud to our product recall procedure. So in the case of a product recall, they are contacted just like any other customer. It is part of our traceability process. All of our waste is recorded, and it is split into waste and donations. So everything we donate is recorded. So in the case of something like a product recall or withdrawal, we know exactly where all of that product has gone. Staff training as well has been really, really important. Again, Michelle touched on this. Our QC team are very aware of our donation process. We have a separate procedure. Now, it's a very simple procedure. I don't want people to feel like you have to put in a lot of paperwork around this, but we do have a very simple procedure. Again, it lists what can, what cannot be donated, what level of quality it should be while it's being donated. The setup of the process was incredibly simple. The Food Cloud collects all of our donations on a weekly basis. If we feel that we've got extra product that, you know, has come up through an inventory check, for example, that, I don't know, you know, teriyaki sauce, for example, is coming up for, it's going out of date in a month, we will contact Food Cloud and say, look, we have this coming up in a month. Could you make use of it? So there is ad hoc extra products like that we can donate as well, which is really useful for both sides, really. So then, sorry, if you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so as Carla said at the very start, we're very proud of the amount of food waste we have reduced by working with Food Cloud from Q1 2020. Total impact what we have donated since Q1 2023 is 32.4 tons, which is 77,000 meals, which is fantastic. Yeah, so that's our experience with Food Cloud has been incredibly smooth, basically. We haven't had any issues with the setup of the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Suzanne. That was really brilliant and really great to hear, you know, that coming from yourselves as somebody who, you know, is as a food partner. I know HelloFresh redistribute on a weekly basis, and
Yeah.
I think it is important to highlight. And as you mentioned there, with HelloFresh and with the brand, you know, the whole ethos of the brand is reduce your food waste by providing, you know, just those portions. But it is inevitable, and you know, it is part of the modern food system that there is going to be some surplus that is just completely unavoidable. So, you know, and what you're donating, I think, Suzanne's probably safe to say it's a very minimal amount. You know, you keep your waste to a minimum, but that still has a huge impact. You know, the equivalent of 77,000 meals in the space of 2 years is fantastic. So really just to say, you know, thank you. You know, and the food that HelloFresh, protein and fruit and veg, we could redistribute any amount of protein and fruit and veg through your hubs. So really appreciate it and appreciate your support. So I suppose in terms of you spoke about your processes there and about, you know, the role that you and your team of QCs play. Can you give us a bit of an insight into, you know, what does day-to-day food safety look like when you're handling surplus food?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, because we treat Food Cloud like any other customer, the food is the produce is kind of kept the same. We do have a process of kind of labeling our food if we don't feel if it has to go to waste. So obviously, if there's an issue with it, we do use a process of labeling. So we have like a label for waste. We have a separate area for food donation. Before that, as we said, we donate on a weekly basis. So that goes through a thorough QC check before it's allowed to leave the building. Everything is documented then so that we have the traceability. So there hasn't been a huge amount of change that we've had to do to any of our food safety systems or records or anything like that, because you should be recording your waste anyway. So it's been a very, very simple process to add this into our food safety system.
Brilliant. And I suppose leading on to that, you know, has partnering with Food Cloud, has it influenced your food safety processes in any way? Has anything been applied differently?
I suppose our inventory checks are much more thorough. You have to keep on top of it. And I suppose when the inventory team are doing their checks, they're doing that with food donation in mind. So it's not that, again, my example of the teriyaki sauce is going out of date in a month. So, you know, you get onto the culinary team, can we use this in meals? But also there's the fact that this food can be donated. So let's work on that straight away. Yeah, so it has influence. We are very tied on our inventory and of our FIFO system.
Brilliant. Good to hear. And I suppose that my last question, I'm just conscious of time, you know, as a current food partner, if we will have food businesses on here who maybe are interested in surplus food redistribution, but they're just unsure about food safety or liability. What advice would you give to those people, or what's the key takeaways that you would say to those people?
Again, I think Karen actually covered it really, really well. Once your food, there's never any concern from me or from our brand about once the food leaves here and goes to Food Cloud, because I do know that they have just as much of a robust food safety management system as we do. And that could be a misconception out there that once it goes, it's just, there's no control. But absolutely, I've been to Food Cloud, I've seen their processes in place. So I'm fully confident that once it leaves our back door, it's being just as much control as it would be inside.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So we have a question here in the chat from Sylvia. Has Food Cloud had to deal with a product recall? So I think, Karen, this is probably one for yourself.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we've had to deal with product recall. And exactly, the warehouse management system identifies where the product has gone. We have a product level detail warehouse management system, so it does trace the exact product to where it's gone, and within, like I would say, we allow ourselves 15 minutes, but honestly within 5 minutes those products are recalled. And also it depends on the situation, but also we would have I have had situations where the Food Safety Authority have arrived at the door if it was a public health matter, and again, we've always had no issue with identifying where the products have gone.
Just, I suppose, another question, Suzanne, just to go back to what you're mentioning there, just around the donation processes, and you mentioned there about you have a team of people there who are very aware of the relationship, of the processes that you have in place. And I suppose it's just thinking about training, clear guidelines, what role, and I suppose this is a question really to everybody, what role do you think education and training plays in ensuring food safety and surplus food redistribution?
Yeah, it's hugely. And I think that's something that we got very right at the start, I would say, working with Food Cloud, and getting that education, getting that training in place at the very, very start. Now it's just part and parcel of what we do. And everybody that should be aware is trained, and if retraining takes place as part of your normal training process. But yeah, it's critical.
Brilliant. Great. And I suppose we're coming up to time, and it's a question I'll ask to all three of you. And I suppose the purpose really of today's session was to talk about, kind of breaking down the barriers or the misconceptions on food safety and surplus food redistribution. I suppose what are the most common food safety misconceptions when it comes to surplus food redistribution? Michelle, probably start with yourself on that one.
Yeah, people think that maybe it might be of an inferior quality. And that's absolutely not the case. It's absolutely to the same standard as if you were buying it from a supermarket or whatever. It's exactly the same quality. It has to adhere to the same requirements as we've already said. So I think that's maybe one misconception that's absolutely not justified in any shape or form. You can see by what Karen's saying there, by what Suzanne is saying, is they treat it no differently than any other type of product. It's handled exactly the same way. It might just go down a different supply chain. That's the only difference.
Yeah. And I suppose, why do you think that surplus food redistribution is sometimes seen as a higher food safety risk, say, than regular food handling? Is that perception justified?
Is that to me, Carla?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, just following on to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, no, I don't think it's justified. It absolutely isn't. I mean, the food donation companies are regulated this exact same way as if it was a food manufacturer. They have to enforce the same regulations. They're being inspected by the department, by EHOs, whoever it might be. So, it's not justified at all. Yeah, I don't know if Karen wants to come in on that.
Yeah, I was just going to give you an example actually where Michelle, so some of the food that comes into the warehouse will be designated for the kitchen, for example. And at the moment we produce 300 plus community meals that go out to elderly day centres or whatever. And we're very heavily inspected because even of that action. And earlier on this year, I actually had to get Michelle's advice because we had to apply for an exemption to 853, even just in the small operation that we're doing. So I think it's important to understand that we are really regulated to the same standards as any other food business, and we did get that exemption, by the way. So that was fantastic. But like, it just goes to show you that even if you think you're doing things on a small scale, or let's look at this project, I would even say, I wouldn't say that we're more than regulated because everybody is the same. But I will say that there is a particular eye on food donation because it is a big area, and there is the perception that it's higher risk, which is not. I don't think that that's justified. I just think it has to be managed, and we do manage that risk as best we can, you know.
Brilliant. I think we just have time to up for one more question, and another question has just come into the chat here, Suzanne, for yourself. Do you know what % of food is wasted at HelloFresh and how much of this is being donated?
I wouldn't have a percentage off the top of my head, to be fair. But I would say of the percentage that does have to go to waste, it is quite a small percentage. We do keep our forecasting and inventory and ordering very tight, as tight as possible. I would say it would be 80 to 85% of what we do waste would be donated.
Brilliant. Lovely. And I think we have time probably for one more question. And we're coming up to time. I suppose Michelle and Karen, I did ask Suzanne there, you know, if there was anything, I suppose, Michelle, really for yourself as well, you know, for any food businesses that are interested in surplus food redistribution, but maybe are a little bit nervous about the food safety side of things, what would be the one thing that you would say to those people?
I would say get together with your team, think it through, think about every single product that you think might be able to be donated, and think about the risks associated with that product. Whether it be packaging, whether it be the temperature monitoring of it, whether it be that you're going to sell it fresh or frozen, you have to think it all the way through. It won't be any more different than if you were developing any other product. It's exactly the same processes. So I would say just go for it. Don't hold back. What harm can there be? It's a good cause. It helps you in so many ways. It helps with your own waste. It helps with your own stock management, your FIFO system, as Suzanne said. The benefits far outweigh any other obstacles that you might come across.
Great.
Yeah,
thank you.
And just lastly there, the earlier in your process you can identify what can be donated, obviously the better for food donation, because you know, obviously we manage quite short dated stock, but we know that food businesses can identify that stock earlier in their process, and if that can happen, that's always a benefit for food donation. And always just pick up the phone, or throw us an email. We're happy to discuss any sort of concern you have or question you have. We're always happy to discuss that. Thanks, Karen.
Great. Michelle, Karen and Suzanne, thank you so much for your time. That has been a really brilliant discussion and really some great takeaways, some great knowledge and wisdom there shared, which hopefully will resonate with others. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. As mentioned, we have recorded the session, so it will be available shortly, and I will circulate it in an email afterwards. So just to wrap up to say thank you so much. If anybody would like to find out more, please do contact FoodCloud at food@foodcloud.ie. And yep, just final thanks to Karen, Michelle and Suzanne.